It's all over but the shouting, but now comes the hard part, actually putting together a government. Welcome to SkyWatch TV for Monday, November 14th, 2016. I'm Derek Gilbert. Today, a special broadcast as we look at the task of assembling an administration. What can we expect from the incoming Trump administration? As we told you last week, 81% of white evangelical Christians turned out to vote for Mr. Trump. That's a much higher percentage than voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, and in much greater numbers. You can make a very good case that were it not for evangelical Christians, Mr. Trump would not be the president-elect. But there's a danger, according to an insider, policy analyst, longtime participant in the Washington scene, of the men behind the scenes of the George W. Bush administration who he says were no friends of American Christians, getting back into power through the Trump administration. Why does that concern him? And how will we know if that's actually the case? We turn to friend of SkyWatch TV and author of the new book, Future War, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis. Colonel Maginnis, you've raised an interesting point that there's a possibility that Democratic Party, or rather Republican Party operatives who previously served under the George W. Bush administration could find themselves back in power, and that if that happens, Christians who voted in very large numbers for Donald Trump may find that his administration doesn't function the way they hope. What are your concerns about the way the transition team for Mr. Trump sets up the incoming administration?
Well, certainly the transition team is just starting off on their operations. They have 73 days prior to the inauguration on the 20th of January, but they have 100 positions to fill, and with the right types qualifications of personnel. Here in Washington, you have certainly a large population of people that have those backgrounds, those very technical backgrounds for all pieces of government, all departments, and so forth. And so there's no doubt that if you were to look at the website where you can apply for a position in the Trump administration, that say a very sizable percentage of those that are applying are coming from the Washington metro area. And that's understandable. These are people that have been in government or won government, some of which, frankly, may have been non-aligned with one of the political parties, and therefore think that there's a chance. If they have a particular expertise that is hard to find, which is not unusual in the federal government, then they'll probably be on some list. The concern now is that there are a lot of people that were in the Never Trump arena, a lot of people that signed letters saying, they don't support Mr. Trump. And so they'll have to go through those lists to confirm whether or not these are people that are legitimately not aligned with, Ms. Clinton or with another political party, and then therefore, wouldn't automatically and rightfully so be dismissed. Now, you have a good executive council advising Vice President-elect Mike Pence. And so, Gingrich, certainly, you have Mike Flynn, you have a whole host of people, plus a long list of other members of the committee from all over the nation. So you have a lot of good people there. It is a daunting task to find the right people to go into these very tough jobs. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to serve. This is very tough. You're asking to give up your career. You're asking to give up, in some cases, what little freedom that you do have. And in some cases, also a significant financial burden in order to serve in an administration. So this is tough to find qualified folks. Now, having said all that, it seems to me that 4 out of 5 evangelical Christians, according to various polls, favor Mr. Trump's election, and they voted. And so I would argue that the droves of evangelicals that turned out to the polls to elect Mr. Trump were really decisive in this election. And so I think it's incumbent upon Mr. Trump and his committee to make sure that the Christian community is well represented in those 4,100 appointments. I think that not only fair, but certainly if you recognize that for a lot of us evangelicals, we see this as a spiritual war, and if you're going to go to war, you're going to go to war knowing the threat. Well, it seems to me that the threat is, in a large degree, is a spiritual battle. And if you're spiritually attuned, then you're not going to be terribly useful in a spiritual battle. There are a lot of people that are very bright, a lot of people that have a lot of skills, a lot of experience here in Washington. They aren't attuned to the Spirit of God. So I think that's important. I go back and I think about when Mr. Ashcroft was appointed as the Attorney General. I remember meeting him right before he took office, and it seemed to me a genuine Christian who loved the Lord, who was well qualified for the position, but he certainly faced a firewall of criticism from the left as he went into these positions. And clearly, Mr. Trump said, we're going to make America great again. The way we get great again is we've got to rebut the bad decisions made by Mr. Obama and his administration and all the ideologues that he brought into federal government. And it's going to be, in some cases, rather painful to reverse a lot of those things, because the federal bureaucracy and the left is going to be very upset as we roll over stones and we also terrible things underneath it, and we have a clean house. These are things that come as a result of elections. Elections have consequences, and whether the left are Mr. Trump won. Now he has an obligation to go in and fulfill the platform in which he began on and the promises that he made to the American people who elected him. And I think high on the list must be appointing the right justices to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
That certainly was decisive for me. Certainly, he has to be a man that promotes religious freedom, and especially, hammers those that, are persecuting Christians, whether here at home or abroad. Then, I was struck in the third debate by, the leading question that Chris Wallace made regarding life. And Miss Clinton, just sent me in orbit in terms of her pro-abortion, killing that child until the very last minute was okay, that they had no constitutional rights. These things are distressing. And so I think that we in the Christian community have a reasonable expectation that will be represented in the Trump administration, that the policies that the president-elect ran on will, in fact, be evident as he goes forward in the first 100 days and subsequently. And these are, I think, shared, these views that I'm sharing now are shared widely across certainly the Christian community in the United States. So we have great expectations, great hopes, but at the same time, I think we need to be people of prayer. We need to be praying for this transition team, that they'll find the right people for all these 4,100 positions, and they'll do it in a timely basis, and then we'll get down to work.
There are two men whose names I think were very interesting on this list. And one was a change as Mr. Trump quietly kind of shuffled his transition team this past week. Viewers may know that for months, Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey has been working behind the scenes as the head of the transition team. And this past week, after the election, Mr. Trump reorganized his transition team and put Vice President-elect Mike Pence in charge of the transition team. So this is a two-part question. First, how did you react when you heard about that? And secondly, as a military man, I'm curious to know your opinion of the presence of Lieutenant General Mike Flynn on the transition team, considering his criticism of some of the directions that the Obama administration's foreign policy took.
Yeah. I personally favor the decision to put Vice President-elect Mike Pence in that job. I know through friends that know him, and they say he's a godly man, a very good man, someone that will do a wonderful job. And in the nation's capital, and he understands in government. He, unlike Mr. Trump, who hasn't been an elected official, Mike Pence has, of course, served as governor, served in Congress. He knows wherewith how to do this governing business, which is very complex. Replacing Governor Christie was not a surprise because, after all, we had new revelations regarding some of Governor Christie's associates with regard to the so-called Bridgegate episode. They were convicted. And so I think just to avoid any association with a potential scandal or the appearance of perhaps impropriety, there may be a host of issues. But I think it was probably good for Governor Christie and good for the transition team not to be encumbered by that. This is a busy time. They only have a couple of months to put together an entire government. And so we just didn't need this sort of distraction. And yet it would have been a distraction as we go forward. Now, with regard to Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, I don't know him personally. I do know some of the others that are on the campaign, that are on the transition team. Everything I've seen is very honorable, very well-spoken. He's said some things evidently to President Obama that did not go well. You have to keep in mind, general officers, like people in the administration, serve at the pleasure of the president.
Right.
No matter who that president is. So if you are going to disagree with the president and the president no longer wants your services, then the president says, well, thank you, but you can leave, please. And that's how it works. It's tough enough being the president of the United States, tough enough running the arguably the most important country in the world that has so many responsibilities, that you don't need distractions. You need a loyal group of people. Now, at the same time, you need people that are willing to tell you when you're making a mistake.
Right.
I think in General Flynn's situation, he was telling President Obama he was making a mistake, but that didn't fly all that well with the National Security Council and some of Mr. Obama's other advisors. So, it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to stand up to the President of the United States and say, you're doing this wrong. But I think that speaks well of General Flynn, speaks well of the administration for selecting him to be a member of the executive committee. So we'll see how we go forward here.
And I share your opinion of Vice President-elect Pence, having lived in Indiana while he was serving 6 terms in Congress, and still having family members in Indiana who speak very highly of his term as governor there. But I knew some people who were very politically active in the Republican Party who got to know him personally, and they say that he is, as he appears to be, he is a real deal. So we're very encouraged by that. One final question. You already mentioned prayer, which, of course, is our main weapon as Christians in the spiritual war that we face. But what other concrete things might we do as Christians, as American Christians, to encourage the incoming administration to look for people, for solid Christians to fill positions in the government?
Anecdotally, it occurred to me that what Franklin Graham did by going around to all the state capitals and hosting a prayer rally to pray. So we need to be in prayer, as you indicate, Derek, for those that might be willing or might be asked to serve, and that we would lift them up in prayer. Now, if we know people that we think would be suitable, then I think that we ought to communicate to the Trump campaign. We ought to communicate to members of Congress that have an in with the Trump campaign. They have a website. You can add your comments there. You can monitor what's going on. You can express publicly, the types of individuals that you would like to see in the Trump administration. These are things that are all part of our great democracy in this country, and therefore I think that we should take advantage, much like many of us were outspoken throughout the campaign about the good and the bad with regard to Ms. Clinton versus Mr. Trump. Then I think at this point we need to prayerfully and rightly express our opinions with regard to who ought to be on Mr. Trump's team, and the direction that he promised that he would take the country is something that we have every reason to expect that he'll do.
Well, I fibbed. I've got one final question, and that is, what would it take to convince you to accept a position inside a Trump administration?
Now, that's always tough. I've been in Washington for decades. I have seen how exhausting these positions can be. You sacrifice a great deal, and so it would have to be the right position, and that my wife would have to agree with it, and that I felt as if it was something the Lord would want me to do. I have a lot of acquaintances that I'm talking to now who either want to influence the process of who should go in there. I've talked to some of them personally that would like me to go into certain positions because of my writings and my vocal positions over decades here in Washington. I've always imagined that confirmation could be pretty sticky. I can just see the Democrats, because I've testified in Congress a number of times, and I know what it's like to be attacked by the liberals about things that I think are the right things to do. So it's a very uncomfortable position that we place our appointees in, because they have to take the fire from the left and the right, and yet they have to be doing those things that their boss, the president, has asked them to do. So it takes a rare person to be able to step up to the plate and be faithful and to do due diligence for the good of the country. So we'll have to wait and see. I certainly don't know. I haven't been asked anything, and probably won't for some time, if at all. But we'll prayerfully consider what's presented if it is.
Well, anyone who is appointed in this administration goes in knowing that not only did they defeat the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton organization, but they were also running in opposition to the Republican elites. So they will catch it from the left and the right. And this is certainly something where people will need the Holy Spirit in order to do the job that God has called them to do. Colonel Maginnis,
Absolutely.
We appreciate your time and your insight, as always.
Thanks, Derek.
Colonel Maginnis' book is available through the SkyWatch TV store. We'll tell you how you can get a copy in just a moment. And coming up, some final thoughts. That's next on SkyWatch TV. The technology that's changing the modern military is changing the very definition of what it means to be human. SkyWatch TV is proud to offer the important new book from Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis, Future War: Super Soldiers, Terminators, Cyberspace, and the National Security Strategy for 21st Century Combat. Order Future War from the SkyWatch TV store, and you'll also get Never Submit by Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis, the Blood on the Altar audio presentation, The Coming War Between Christian versus Christian, featuring Tom Horn and Steve Quayle, What You Don't Know Will Kill You, Genetics, GMOs, and the Plan to Eradicate Humankind, a special investigative report from Tom Horn and the SkyWatch TV team, and a 2-year subscription to SkyWatch TV magazine. This is a value of more than $125, yours for just $24.95. Order now by calling toll-free 844-750-4985 or log on to skywatchtvstore.com. Welcome back to SkyWatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. You know by now that since the election, there have been protests in a number of major American cities. There is some evidence that these are not grassroots, but in fact AstroTurf protests being financed from outside. There are some indications that billionaire George Soros is the man behind these protests. That's no real surprise. We American Christians should recognize that our government, our taxpayers, that means me and you, have been financing protests like this in other nations for many years. In fact, the George W. Bush administration, through the State Department, sent money to George Soros organizations to finance the protests that led to the Orange Revolution in Ukraine and the Rose Revolution in Georgia. Turnabout is fair play, I suppose. Now, how do we as Christians respond? Do we get angry? Do we respond in kind? That doesn't seem biblical to me. On the other hand, we are to be wise as serpents while being gentle as doves. Nobody said being a Christian was easy. You knew the job was difficult when you took it. But we shall see what the next 4 years will hold. I think the one overriding thing that we need to remember always is that we are citizens first and foremost of the kingdom of God, and that is a kingdom not of this world. Our first loyalty is to the King. Thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.